All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Demand Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan, the co-founder of Omni Lab, and today I'm joined by Mari Luke, who is the head of growth at Accord, and she's also the customer. She's also a member of the HubSpot advisory board as well, which is cool. So anyway, we had connected, I think, on LinkedIn and just gone back and forth with each other's posts for a while now. So I thought that it would be an interesting conversation to get you on board to talk a little bit about Q2 planning, which I guess we can kind of say is more even thinking Q3 planning for those folks, because clearly we're already at March 31st. So yeah, Q2 planning hopefully is wrapping up for everyone. If not, then maybe some trouble there. But anyway, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Cool. So I think the first thing I wanted to get into is maybe just kind of your thoughts in general of like why planning is important in general. Like why do we need to be planning for the next quarter? Why is that important? How does that help us grow as a marketing org?
So I think marketers want to be seen as partners in the GTM game. And if you want to be seen as a partner, you have to show up as one.
Yep.
And that means, being accountable for pipeline and planning for pipeline with your partners in sales and CS. So I think I start every quarter with a bunch of math. I think that's how most modern marketers are thinking about GTM planning, right? You don't want to be, I think there's this like old mentality, which frankly, I'm not super familiar with because I'm not from, the print marketing days. That's not my generation and probably yours either.
Nope.
But I think there's still this stereotype, right, of marketing not being pipeline generating, of they just deliver bad leads, and you shouldn't deliver bad leads. You should show up as an equal partner and hold yourself accountable for pipeline. Sure. And so that's how I start Q2 planning is with a whole bunch of math.
Yeah, I love it. Why is that, do you think? I mean, I know I agree with you in terms of, modern marketing coming from different areas, but why do you think that there still is so much focus on driving lots of leads through the funnel versus actually aligning with pipeline, like you said, in your planning?
It's a good question. I'm not sure, honestly.
Yeah.
Do you know? Do you have a hypothesis?
I certainly have, I guess I have an opinion. I mean, I certainly think that it probably depends on the organization, but ultimately, one of the big reasons is because marketers traditionally have thought that they're more accountable and it's something easier to control impressions, clicks, leads, and things like that, because they're further, up on the funnel, right? They're more leading indicators. And once they generate a lead, it's just generally been like, well, hey, I don't have any control over where that goes in the pipeline. So why would I want to be accountable for a number that sales is technically working on? It's sales' job to follow up with the lead. They're the ones that need to move it through the funnel. They're the ones that need to close the deal, et cetera. So I'm a little bit nervous, right? Talking as a marketer, I'm a little bit nervous saying, oh, wow, you're giving me a pipeline number? Like, I don't know if I want to do that, right? Because it's easy for me to control other things down the funnel. So I think that's one thing. Then two is I think the measure of success has just been set for most people to focus on leads predominantly initially. And the measure of success then, if the measure of success for marketing and the way that marketing is compensated is leads, well then obviously marketers are going to focus on leads and optimizing CPLs down as far as possible, because that's what any good marketer would do if my optimization metric is leads. So those are some thoughts. I mean, it probably depends on the organization, but do you agree with that, or any other different thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I think the other thing is that marketing has been sort of on the defense. I don't know if this is an organizational thing or a bigger marketing cultural shift, but I feel like for a long time, marketing has been on the defense, having to justify budget and prove their value and prove their worth. And I don't know if it's like the the mentality of many marketers of like being feeling that way, or if it's an organizational thing. But I think a lot of it has come from like, oh, I need to show the attribution and I need to show that this spend was worth it. And it's easier to track and measure how many clicks did this get? How many leads did it get? Yeah.
Exactly. No, I agree. Well, cool. So, I mean, in terms of like breaking it down, I'd be curious to know if you have a template or you have certain things that you always include. And I assume you're creating some type of slide deck or something, like what's in the plan, right? Is it clearly there's some budget, there's some historical analysis, like what's in it, like what should people be including in their plan for, let's even call it whether it's Q2, Q3, or any quarter for that matter.
Yeah, so I think that what started this conversation is I was thinking about this and
I
looking
know,
at
I
my
saw the post.
spreadsheet.
We had to talk about it.
Yes, looking at my spreadsheet on earlier this week and posted about it on LinkedIn. So the
Yep.
math part starts with what's our ARR goal for the quarter, the year, whatever, right? And usually you start with like the annual, and then you sort of work back like, okay, how much are we going to hit? And this is amongst your executive team, right? Like,
Yep.
okay, cool. The assumption is that the rate of growth is going to continue. So you wouldn't, if you have, you know, $1 million goal for ARR in the year, it's not going to be 250K every quarter, right? It's going to be a little less in Q1, a little more in Q2, and gradually increase, right? Because you're growing off your base. So I already knew what our Q2 ARR goal was going to be, but spoiler, it went up a little.
Woohoo! Of course, as always, right? I mean, you know, you have to be challenged. I mean, it would be like, what? I know it's the same number as always. That of course can happen.
I wouldn't be in a startup, right? If I did, if I wasn't here for the challenge.
Not at all. Not at all.
And so it definitely starts with math, right? Of like, cool, we're, you know, I work with a fantastic sales team, so we've hit our Q1 goal. So I know that we are going to start from where we expected to start from Q1, and then we look at what's up for renewal, and then right, what is our expected churn? What's our expected expansion off of our base? What's in the pipeline? So then from there you get like your growth delta, right? What do we need to bring in new business? Then you look at the existing pipeline, you subtract that out. And then you, if you're fully inbound, it would be then just backwards out your funnel math of like, how many leads do you need? If you do a split with partially outbound, last quarter, we were 90-10 split. So 90% inbound, 10% outbound. We've increased our rep count and expanded our sales team. So that's going to an 80-20 split this quarter. But we still backwards out the math and come up with a lead number. How many are coming from inbound and how many are coming from outbound? And then the next step, right, is like, cool, the lead number for Q2 is obviously bigger than Q1 because the revenue number is bigger. And so then I go back and I look at historicals of like, cool, where did our leads come from? What did we do? How did they perform? Right. Leads that came from this, we did a big launch on Product Hunt in Q2. So how did those launch leads perform? How many did we get from launch? Are we doing something similar or not at all in we did the Product Hunt launch in Q1. I'm already thinking Q2.
Oh, good. I mean, startup life. I mean, when do we sleep? Never.
Right. So then it's like, cool, where am I going to spend budget? Where are the efforts going to? What are the big bets in the next quarter? So usually I do a mix of like, here's where we were, right? Here's how it performed. And then here's where I think, right, pretty predictable things we know work. And then here are one or two big swings for Q2 where I hope, cross my fingers and make an educated guess, right?
Right. Yeah, there's always the ambiguous element of who knows, right? I mean, we've never been on this channel before. We've never tried the specific campaign, so we're going to see, right? We're going to experiment, test it out. I think what you said is really important for people to hear too, though, is because it sounds like there's obviously a combination of two things. And we were talking about this before we even started recording, but there's what investors obviously need to see in terms of growing the company. And I'm curious of your thoughts on this, because there's clearly a number that they have in mind, or the CEO has been told by them that, hey, to get to the next Series B, Series C, et cetera, we need to get to these milestones from a revenue perspective. But then there's looking at historically what's been done, is what you're saying, right? You're looking at the math of saying, okay, we've got our target, but let's go see actually how we do that. Like historically, what's been possible? How much pipeline do we have outstanding right now? How much do we think that's going to close? What's the delta in terms of the amount of new pipeline we need? Do we have enough time to get there? And also, do we have the resources and spend to actually, reach that goal? So I assume that, for you, like looking at the historicals is a very, very important part where it provides that gut check versus just saying, hey, cool, let's just see what we can do with this overall kind of big revenue number in aggregate and just double the leads and see what happens, right? You're basing it off of actual conversion rates that are happening in the CRM.
Yeah. So when we initially did our Q2 math, the SQL number was like double. And I was like,
Yeah.
we didn't double our team. We're not, we can double our spend, but frankly,
Yeah.
we still can't double high quality SQLs. And
Uh-huh.
so we looked at like, where else have things shifted in the funnel, right? And so for us, we saw a decrease in our SQL to opportunity rate last quarter. And part of it was because one of the campaigns we ran had lower quality SQL, so they didn't convert to deal as high, right? So then when I took those out, I was like, oh, cool. This SQL to operate is actually better than high, better than the whole, right? So, okay, we're not planning on running this campaign again. Great. I can expect a higher SQL to opportunity rate. But then, I had a conversation with my partner and the head of sales and the CEO, and was like, we just need to improve our SQL to operate. And there are things we can do on the marketing side, and then there are process tightening things we can do on the sales side. And we kind of just have to partner on this, because otherwise, this SQL goal is unrealistic and never going to happen, at least not in the next 3 months, right? We just aren't, it would take, like we were talking about, like a cascade of miracles to make it happen. And I was like, that's not a plan.
Exactly.
And not one I want to commit to or stake my reputation on, right? And so being really realistic about like, okay, we're adding these additional campaigns, and then here are the things that we're specifically doing to move this one metric, right? SQL to opportunity conversion rate, while maintaining, right? We also can't slip on our MQL to SQL, because if we slip on MQL to SQL, then you won't have enough SQLs, right? So it's like we have to maintain this while improving this little section in the funnel and hitting our SQL goal, which is no small thing, and made me reconsider, right? Some of the other sort of stretch items that were in my Q2 plan, frankly, just had to go. And I was like, okay, like we can't do it all. And that's startup life, right? Of like ruthless prioritization. Like, okay, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. This has to happen. What are the resources that I can pull from somewhere else to make this happen? Because the business depends on it.
That is literally exactly what I just said on this Clearbit webinars. I said, literally, focus is your competitive advantage. And like, we need to focus our energy on the right things, because there could be, say, this massive TAM, massive opportunity, massive market, but we probably don't have the budget, content, messaging to really actively go after the whole thing. So let's figure out who are the people that we've got the best chance of winning today, because to your point, we've got to still drive the right number of MQLs to get the right number of SQLs to meet our targets ultimately up to the funnel. And the best way to do that is focus on the people that are actually ready to go right now. So okay, so let me kind of recap and see if there's anything I'm missing here. So first thing is like, and maybe this is kind of, I don't know if this is out of order here, but where were we, right? Let's go over where we were and essentially a review of all the different things, like what channels were working best, what were the past metrics that we had before, et cetera, et cetera. And then really going and making sure that we use that revenue target that's provided by the CEO or investors, really is where it's coming from. And then we backtrack using historical information, using historical conversion rates, how many leads we got in the past, et cetera, from what channels and whatnot, to actually figure out, okay, what is the amount of leads in QLs, SQLs, et cetera, that we will need in order to actually hit this new revenue goal to double. So that's a big point. And then you said also to make sure that you also list out the different types of campaigns that you plan on running, so that giving your CEO or your CMO, et cetera, a path to understand, okay, these are the actual programs we're thinking about running. So I guess on that, is there any more detail to like how much you break out those campaigns? I mean, clearly, like for people that are not all the way neck deep in marketing, do you try to simplify that a little bit just to kind of make sure it's a nice, easy message? Or how do you lay that out in terms of like the next quarter, for example, for Q2 for you?
Yeah. So usually I try to, like, I'll just break out like, oh, okay, 40% is going to come from inbound, which I equate as content and organic and direct. I don't measure offline because I don't know how to impact it. It's the black hole of marketing. Let's be real. Right. And then there's like paid, obviously. There's other channels. Like for us last quarter there was a launch. This quarter we're going to do in-person events, so that's a channel that we are attributing leads to this quarter.
Hmm.
And then the attribution on it is imperfect,
Hmm.
as attribution always
As
is,
always.
as
Hmm.
always. And you know, I think a lot of this is also like internal marketing, right? Of like
Hmm.
making sure that the rest of your executive team is bought in on the fact that like the point here is not attribution. Attribution is not
Hmm.
the end goal. The end goal is pipeline, right? I use
Hmm.
attribution to help inform where did things go well and where did things not go well, but like the
Right.
goal is not 100% attribution. Like who's time
Right.
for that?
No, agreed. Well, it's interesting. So this is actually a point that like constantly comes up with a lot of our clients. But I think the big thing, and I would assume you'd agree, but getting straight on how you actually plan on attributing, because a lot of times what I'll see is that people are going into the CRM system running different reports that are using different filtering criteria. That's not using the same filtering criteria that you are in your reports, and then you get two different sets of answers. And they're saying, well, hey, I want to look at the data this way because this makes sense, but then you're saying, well, no, that's really not how you can look at it. It doesn't make sense. There's some things that else you can't see that aren't attributable in the funnel. So really you need to kind of pull in some of these metrics. So how far do you go into that with some of like, I mean, with your executive team, do you like lay out like, hey, these are the reports, they live in Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever CRM you use. This is how we're actually going to record on attribution, just so there's alignment there? Or for you guys, is that not an issue? And, they're just like all good with it.
I have a dashboard that I share and is public of like, this is what I use to track attribution. And
Yep.
so it's very transparent of like, I'm going to put them here in our meeting notes, in our Notion, wherever. You can just click
Yep.
the link and go see it in the HubSpot if you want to.
Yeah.
And then there's no need, right? The reason people are creating reports on their own with different data sets is because you didn't provide them one. If you provide them
Good
one,
point. Exactly. And they don't know where it is and they're not shared on the dashboard. And you're not saying constantly pointing, hey, go look at this one. No. The reports, go look at my dashboards right here. It's called Marketing Dashboard 2022. That's the
yeah,
one we're using, right? So
yeah.
that everyone knows like this is what the data actually looks like. And then also, of course, like aligning on the fact that, things are not always, attributable, which is that a hard conversation for you when you get into that as well about the whole, hey, well, there's the brand awareness campaigns are running, and we're also trying to create demand. Not everything's gated. Do you guys get into that battle, or what does that look like in terms of attribution?
No, I definitely have in the past.
Uh-huh.
Not in my current role, I guess.
Yeah.
Lucky with a lot of great buy-in from the executive team at Accord.
Yeah.
I
Love it.
think,
I mean, that's great. Sounds like you've got an easy life then. I mean, that sounds great.
I mean, it's one problem I don't have to deal with, and I'm happy to not deal with it.
Uh-huh.
I think the teams that are struggling with it, it's because if that's not the conversation you want to have, you sort of have to like move on and have a bigger and more meaningful conversation. In my
Mm.
experience, when I was pulled into those conversations is because I was failing to provide value and insight into why this other thing was more important.
Mm. Got it. Got it. Yep, makes sense. And then in terms of like going into and understanding, all right, hey, let's actually make sure that we've got, the right starting point for building this out and actually presenting it. I think a key thing that I see a lot of times is that marketers are bringing too much information. There's too many data points. There's too many metrics. There's all this stuff that maybe they don't understand, right? You're not speaking in the language of, say the CEO that maybe potentially doesn't have a strong background in marketing. So do you also kind of take that into consideration? Like, because I mean, I think the key thing always is simplify, 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 but maybe you would disagree and it's a much different situation for you guys. But how do you think about, making sure you're communicating things that obviously that person's going to understand versus getting into all the weeds that you and I probably understand all too well in marketing?
Jonathan, I think you nailed it. This is definitely the trap I have fallen into, and let's be
So
real,
have
I
I.
will fall into again, is
Yeah.
I love data, I love spreadsheets, I love cohort analysis, and I
Uh-huh.
will talk your ear off about how I built this report and why it's important and why I'm
Yep.
excited about it and all the things I learned from it. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is that there's like one or two bullet points that are really impactful to the business, but they get lost in all the
Mm-hmm.
other stuff.
Exactly.
And like the reason, going back to the previous point, right? The reason you get pulled into this conversation about attribution is because it's the one thing that the CEO or whoever can understand out of the
Mm.
12 things you told them. And so
Mm.
they're going to grab on to that one thing they understand and ask you a bunch of questions about it. And then you're going to answer them all because you feel compelled to, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is like, only present the things that are really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Answer the question, but you don't have to give. Sometimes giving the 10-minute answer is not helpful. The summarized high level version is actually more helpful and more impactful to the other
Right.
people who are just trying to get the information they need to make decisions.
Right, right. Well, that leads me to, I guess, another thing is like, what would you not put in there? What are the things like you'd be like, oh, not going to go down that road. I've been down that road before. If I put that in the deck, we're going to spend hours talking about it and it's going to confuse them. They're not going to know what it means. Is there anything like that you would say, this definitely shouldn't be ever in your planning doc for a given quarter from a marketing perspective?
It's an interesting question. What would I
Anything
not
that,
put in? Some of the
mm-hmm.
details of the campaigns and how you're going to do them and what exactly you're going to do and what you, yeah, I wouldn't put in because it's inviting feedback on things that are not necessarily final or at a time when you're not look feedback is great. There's a time and a place, right? So
Yep.
getting feedback on like the content of this campaign when you're trying to get sign off on your plan is not helpful.
Right,
Just
right.
don't put it in.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't open that
Right.
can of worms.
Right. Or like one of the things, right, in our Q2 plan is like refining our messaging, right? I'm not
Uh-huh.
going to put draft copy in my marketing plan
Yep.
because it's not the time when I want feedback on copy. Do I want
Exactly.
feedback on copy? Yes. But first, I need you to just say yes to this plan, yes to this
Exactly.
budget,
Yeah.
and then
So
we'll get
yeah,
into the
don't
how.
open the can. Don't start saying, "All right, here's the actual creative we're going to use. Here's the actual piece of content. Would you like to read that before?" Oh, and by the way, in the historical campaigns, let's talk about impression share for a second. All the impressions and clicks and some of those leading indicators. Let's talk about that because I mean, I know you know all there is to know about Google Ads or anything from a LinkedIn perspective. Let's go into that as well. And by the way, we've got this cool retargeting campaign. Here's the exclusion criteria we're using in the retargeting campaign because I know you want to know that. And here's the objectives that we're using in the channel. It's like those things clearly like no one cares at that level. I mean, not that they I mean they care, right? But they don't have time to sit there and understand all those details. So to your point, just break it down and keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
What's like have you made any like mistakes in the past? I mean, kind of like on this trend of like what not to put in it. Has there been like some mistakes you've made in the past where you're like, oh God, like this is definitely not the way this should be running and some things you maybe would have done differently?
I mean, I've made so many
Of
mistakes.
course. That's what we all do, right? It's the only way to learn.
Yeah. Other mistakes I've made, under or over budgeting by too much.
Uh-huh.
I think this is a pretty common one. So, I think there's definitely a tendency to like inflate your budget, but then if you can't justify it and explain it, I think
Mm-hmm.
that can be a very slippery slope. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think not tying your budget to your plan
Mm.
is
Mm.
definitely a bad one, right? So, like, I've done this before where I'm like, oh, yeah, we're going to spend X amount on paid. And they're like, okay, well, this is more than what we spent, like double what we spent on paid last quarter. And yet you have nothing about paid in your marketing plan. And
Right.
like you don't have a paid search person on your team, are you? Like, who's going to double the spend on this? And it's like, all right.
Exactly. Well, that and it's like, well, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure that budget has to go up in one area or not. It doesn't have to be paid media, but you gave me a number that's double our number from last quarter the year before. So yeah, things are going to increase. We're going to need more budget to reach a larger audience or to do whatever types of campaigns we're going to need to do to actually meet that number to drive more MQLs, SQLs, or whatever the metrics are. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who should? I'm always curious about this. I mean, who should be involved in this? I think this part's actually really critical, right? I mean, like you're doing a lot of this planning, and I'm sure your team's involved in some respects. But I mean, who should be involved in this when you're putting together this deck or this presentation or whatever format it's in? Who should be there? Should like CS be involved? Should sales weigh in at all? Should you have some other alignment with some other teams, or is it really just focusing on what you're doing in marketing, keeping it simple, and then working either with your boss, the CEO, I assume, or whoever. How do you think about that?
Yeah. The math part has to be done with sales because it's their
Mm-hmm.
number two, right? Like,
Yep.
I think this is, um, that's the key, right? Is it has to be done with your head of sales or whoever your peer is in the sales. And then
Mm-hmm.
I always collaborate with our CEO. This is maybe also a sign of how small we are. Like there's 17 of us.
Yeah.
Maybe that shifts when there's 50 people, right? You don't work quite as closely with the CEO on the budget, but at this stage, we're
Mm-hmm.
small. The math part that starts with conversations with the CEO and the head of sales. And
Mm-hmm.
then I'm like, okay, cool. I have the math. I looked at the historicals. I come back with recommendations of like, here's generally what I'm thinking as far as marketing plan and spend. Let me do a gut check before I, you know, go too deep into this. And then I work with the rest of our marketing team to also do a gut insanity check of like, if you guys think this is terrible or crazy or stupid, please tell me
Mm.
now.
Right. Exactly.
Because like the other people on your team, right? I mean, assuming you've hired the right people, have
Right.
know a lot more than you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about certain areas of the marketing business. And they should also be giving you feedback on like, nope, this is a bad idea. Or ask you those
Mm-hmm.
questions of like, are we hiring a new PPC consultant or agency? Because I'm
Exactly.
seeing double budget here and you've been doing this. And
Yep.
frankly, it's not your forte or whatever, right? Whatever the feedback is.
Exactly. No, agreed. Well, so sales for sure, being involved in the metrics area, obviously your whole marketing team, make sure you get a gut sanity check with the team. Anyone else that should be involved? Or would you say like those are the key people and then you're ready to take that plan and go present it to the board, your boss, et cetera, et cetera?
I think if you have a head of CX, I would also include that person as far as
Hmm.
retention goes, because retention is a big part of that math.
Hmm. Okay. Because are you also running, I assume, campaigns for expansion types of accounts as well? So you're trying to expand
Yeah,
existing accounts that you have? Okay, right. So of course you'd have CS involved in that type of conversation.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's so interesting. I mean, the planning process because I think that those two. I mean, at least the biggest points always for me that like always get missed out on is we didn't align on how we're going to attribute success. We didn't align on what the measure of success was on actually how we're going to measure everything right for the different campaigns that we're looking at. Many times CPL is not backed up all the way to revenue. It's just a CPL number. Some people literally I talk to like that CPL seems really high seems high. We should get that down. I'm like, well, let's do the calculation. It's a formula. So let's just see what that looks like. And then, you get wildly different, results like, oh wow, like our cost per lead's actually okay. So I think back to your point, like looking at the historicals and said the CRM's so critical versus just saying, hey, we did this last month. Let's see if we can do a little bit more, right? Versus saying like, all right, let's see what's actually realistic. And if our CPL is 1,500 or whatever types of campaigns you're running, that we've got the associated budget to actually support getting the additional 50, 100 or whatever it is leads for that quarter. Do you actually like quarter by quarter, like how does that plan change? How do you think about that? I mean, obviously Q3 is going to come around. Are you guys going to do another planning session again? And is that kind of doing the same format as you had before every single quarter? Or do you think about it differently throughout the year? Because I assume you have a yearly target. And
Yeah.
then that's again, like you said, spread it over the quarters. You kind of know generally how things are going to align, but of course, like life doesn't happen like you wanted to on Excel spreadsheets. Right? So like, okay, great. We said Q2 is going to be this because we did some simple division. Said Q1 is going to be a little less, Q2 a little more. It's like you said earlier. But how do you think about it when you do it the next quarter? Does anything change there, or is it really just the same process?
I start from the same place. It never ends
Yeah.
the same way, right? So
Right. Yep.
my spreadsheet always gets a little bigger, a little more complicated. I think the big iteration that I did from last quarter to this quarter was taking a much closer look at historicals. We also, there are things you can't predict, right? So, like, previously we were seeing all of our deals of a certain ACV in what we call startup. And then all of a sudden this quarter, we got a lot more leads in through our growth pipeline. And so we had to build out a separate pipeline in our CRM, and they have different close percentages. We have less data on it. So it's more of a guess, but the deal sizes are larger. And what does that do to the
Mm-hmm.
pipeline conversion? So for this quarter, right, we still used a blended conversion rate, but next
Yep.
Q3 planning, I could definitely see, right, depending on how this quarter plays out, having two funnels for like, oh, this is how,
Mm.
leads in the startup pipeline convert through the funnel, and here's
Right.
how growth deals convert through the funnel.
Mm.
Um, so I think that check back on like what actually happened
Mm.
will determine, right, where do you adapt your planning for the next quarter?
That's a good one. That makes a lot of sense too, because I guess if you're not going that far, then potentially you could be allocating campaign budget to both segments, right? Let's call those two different segments that you just mentioned there. But one potentially converts at a much higher rate and allows you to hit your number. Maybe the deals are a little bit smaller, so you need slightly higher volume, but the close rates are really high, sales cycles are shorter. So I guess it's always just a juggle between the two. But either way, making that decision early on, because we don't have unlimited budgets, we don't have unlimited resources, we can't go after everything, right? So making that decision. So do you get pretty involved in that as well and saying, hey, here's my recommendation? I'd actually say that what we're seeing in the data is it's saying that we actually focus a little bit differently. So maybe the CEO and sales is involved in targeting, right? And they're saying, hey, these are the core people that we want to go after, the accounts or firmographic criteria, whatever it may be. But then are you actually going back and saying, okay, cool, actually, I kind of am seeing something a little bit different here. I know you guys are saying this, but I'm seeing things different in the data. How do you kind of
Oh,
handle this all the time?
yeah, for sure. I sort of do a monthly deal analysis and lead analysis. So
Uh-huh.
I'm a big cohort analysis fan. So I look at like
I
all
love
the
it.
leads.
I love talking to you. I mean, you're like, yeah, CRM. Yeah, I'm in there all the time. What are you talking about? I mean, some people are not as much in the CRM as you are, so it's just interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's just a tangent. Like I didn't understand what RevOps was a couple years ago, and I think that at my core, like that's what I love is like just the sort of
It's
technical
perfect.
understanding. As an econ major, I think it just speaks to
Uh-huh.
like my love of spreadsheets and math and statistics. Um, so yes, I we
I
look at
bet
that
that
on
helps
month.
out a ton. I bet it helps out a ton because RevOps, marketing ops. I mean, you couldn't do anything without both those roles are really understanding how the data is moving in. Because then it's like, all right, well, how are we reporting on it? I don't know. Some property here. I don't know what it means, or not sure how the data is mapping. I hope we're mapping it correctly so that we can actually measure it. Oh wait, we're not mapping it correctly at all. Sorry, all that data is useless. It's fallen into an abyss, right?
Yeah. Uh,
So
Yeah, I'm always surprised when I meet startup marketing leaders who are not particularly like that's not their forte, right? Rev and marketing ops and sales ops, whatever you call it. To
yeah,
me, there's a lot of overlap, and won't prioritize a hire against it. I get it. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but I'm like, cool.
sure,
If you're not strong in it, like you should at least hire against it in the
100%.
very near term.
100%, 100%. Well, cool. Well, I guess let's wrap up. We're almost at time. So I think just as kind of like a quick recap, big things are obviously speak to the audience that you're ultimately presenting this to. So keep things simple. Don't get into all the nitty gritty on all little things in terms of the campaign details and content and open up a can of worms, right? We want to get people settled on the overall strategy and what we want to accomplish. Use historical metrics. That's a big thing. So we want to make sure that's real and get gut checks, from our team. And that also goes into the who, like who should be involved in planning. Probably should have CS, especially if we're doing expansion campaigns, like you said. Definitely get alignment with sales. Make sure that, hey, are we going after the right target? Do you have the right metrics? That are we looking at the same metrics with regards to funnel conversion rates? And then obviously aligning with your own team from a marketing perspective and saying, all right, hey guys, like you're the paid media expert. Like I don't know, I don't do this that much. Do you think this is actually possible? Can we actually hit this? So making sure those three things. Another big thing you said is a summary is aligning on attribution. So making sure that you've got a shared dashboard that is shared with everyone who needs to see it, all the important people, which are probably CS, sales, your whole marketing team, plus your C-suite or anyone at the top. So they all know, like, hey, here's how we're viewing the data. So they don't go off creating their own dashboards and then reports saying, hey, we're seeing something completely different here. It looks like pipeline's down by 50%. What's up? And you're like, it's not the case, like look at my dashboard. So I don't know if you'd add anything to that. It's a good summary to kind of close out, but anything to add as a last note on planning or anything related to that?
I think you nailed it.
I killed it. Perfect.
Yep,
Love it.
great wrap up.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for jumping on, and we'll definitely be staying in touch, and I'm sure on LinkedIn as well. So,
Cool. Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
all right. Cheers.